So now in our last component here in our discussion with respect to the CI/CD pipelines on GCP, we got Cloud Run. Now with the Cloud Run, you can simply execute your container image. So it means you're gonna deploy the image onto the Cloud Run service. So one thing is that you can do it manually. The other one is where we're gonna use the YAML configuration and we're gonna actually make up the CI/CD pipeline, right? So first of all, let us see how we can actually come up and deploy our containerized image that we generated from the cloud build. And the last part was generated through the triggers, and we'll see the image and we'll deploy to the cloud run. So manually first and then with the configuration. So let's start with our manual deployment. So here we are with our last build. If you can see, this build was the result of the trigger because we committed the code to the master. And let me open up the Cloud Shell. So coming back here on my history page where I have my build. In the meanwhile, our shell gets provisioned, right? Okay, so we just need to come up and simply say gcloud run and then say deploy. But with the deployment, we need to give the name of the image which you want to deploy, right? So what is your image which you want to deploy? So I'm gonna copy the image name here. So this is the image name. So if you can see, this was our image which was created. So let's copy this image. So this is your image with the secure hash in the end. And give this image name and hit enter. Now the service name is coming up as restaurants. So this is what we are expecting our service name to be. So if you want to change it, you can even write it. So let's authorize. Now the deployment is going to ask you where you want to come up and deploy your service on, right? So what is your exact region? So I'm going to choose this US Central 1, which is 22. So deployment of the container to the Cloud Run services, that's like your restaurants, is now in action. So we are having a revision which is being created. So the traffic is being routed and few more steps, and thereafter you will have your URL to the web service. So let's just wait for acknowledgement here. And here we are with the URL, right? So this is the URL to the web service. Now, if you can recall our local host colon 8080 restaurants, right? So this is how it was giving us the data. And when you will hit exactly on the root, it's gonna say welcome all. So on my Google Cloud Console, I got this URL. So let's copy this URL. And now in parallel to my local host, I'm gonna hit this URL. So we're waiting for the response. You see, it says welcome all, right? It's exactly the same thing. Now let us say slash restaurants, and you see the restaurants coming in. Now on the local host, we haven't refreshed the code, but we pushed the change like John's Cafe, and it is available on the URL. Now this is a manual deployment which we have done, but what we are expecting is the moment we have our code change, so the build gets fired automatically. That we have seen how we can do a continuous integration. For the continuous deployment, we need to come up and do a YAML configuration. So let me directly show you how the YAML configuration goes. So in our project structure here, I got this file called cloudbuild.yaml. So the name has to be cloudbuild.yaml. So it's a GCP specification. In the cloudbuild.yaml, we are going to specify steps for our pipeline. The first step is to come up and build the container image. Now, if you will see, we got gcr.io cloud builders docker. So you're gonna use docker, and automatically the docker file which we have supplied here, it's gonna get used. So you're gonna build the docker image and gcr.io. So this variable, environment variable project id, is going to be used, and every time the a build will take place, it's gonna come up with some new secure hash in the end as a service revision. Now, after your container image is built, you need to make your container image to be pushed into the container registry. So if you can see here in the build details here, so once you have your container image created, right? So your container image was created, so this was successfully created. The next step was to push this container image into the registry. So that is what is the configuration in our next step, right? So with the gcr.io cloud builders docker, we are going to use this push command, and we're gonna push this image to the container registry. Now, once your image is built and it is thereafter registered into the container, we gonna come up and use our Cloud Run service. So this time we are using our gcr.io, google.com, Cloud SDK tools and the Cloud SDK. Then with the entry point as gcloud, so you're gonna execute the gcloud command. We're gonna say run deploy restaurants. Now if you can recall, so coming back here, when we created this, when we executed this command, gcloud run deploy, so this service name was asked from us. So if you want to change it or you want to remain it, if you want to keep it same, right? So that is the same thing which we are able to see here in our YAML configuration. We want the name to be restaurants, and then the image goes like your gcr.io project ID restaurants with the same sharp. So region goes like US Central 1, and here we actually chose the region as US Central 1, right? So that's like number 22. So this is the same region, right, which we are using here. So all these details, they go as you can say arguments, and finally you'll be getting an image. So that is like your gcr.io, and this image is the one which has been now deployed, and you can thereafter use it on the URL, right? So guys, now I'm going to come back in the console here. Instead of cloud build, let us go and see the cloud run. Let me close this shell here. So in the cloud run, what you see is this restaurants as a service, and with the restaurant service coming in, so you have all the revisions for your service which is listed here, right? And we even have the triggers for when and all what we can come up and manage. Now going back to the cloud run, and this was lastly deployed 5 minutes ago, and what we're gonna now do is we're gonna configure it for a continuous deployment thing. So if you want to do it, we first of all will be disabling our last trigger. So I'm just gonna come here, and more or less you just say disable. So you have just disabled your trigger, right? So why I have disabled it, because as of now I'm going to push my configuration file, right? So this is my cloud build.yaml. So I don't want Docker file to come up and build a new image. So that is the reason I have just disabled it, so that it should not work. So let me open my terminal, and so let's see the git status here. So we got this cloud build.yaml as a new configuration file added. So let's say git add, and then I'm gonna recheck the status. So we got it, and we say git commit -m, and we're gonna say the cloud build YAML config, right? So here we are with the commit, and finally I'm gonna say git push -u origin master. Now this is what as in your change. So the change is that you have pushed this YAML configuration into your cloud source repository. So coming back to the cloud source repository, here we are. Let's do a small refresh. So we now can see that there is this one more file added, which is the cloud build YAML configuration, right? And if you see here, so this is, I think this is created in a wrong directory. So probably I just need to rectify it. So this has been copied into a wrong path. So it has to go in the root of the folder. So just give me a moment. So accidentally this file has been added. So the way you got the Docker configuration, right? So same way, this file should be moved out here, right? So this is the correct path for the Docker, right? It should be, I mean, the cloud build.yaml file. So let me quickly come here and say a git status. So we do have some changes. We're just gonna say git add. Let's review it. So let's commit cloud build YAML path in root. And then I'm just gonna do a push again. All right, so here we are with the final push now, and let's go back, refresh. So we got this cloud build.yaml configuration file coming up, right? Which has all the steps to be taken care for your continuous integration and deployment, right? But we need to configure the trigger. So in the triggers, if I go with my history, so you won't see any new trigger getting executed. The reason, we have disabled our trigger, right? So we disabled this trigger. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this trigger. So everything remains the same, but instead one thing that we don't want to use Docker configuration, rather we're going to use the cloud build configuration. So the cloud build configuration location is in the root and the file name is cloudbuild.yaml, right? So let's save this. Now when you will save this, so it is still disabled. So what you can do is you can enable it. And if you want to just review your restaurants trigger, you find that it is again pushed to a branch on the master branch, but this time the configuration is YAML configuration. So in order to come up and find your trigger, you need to do some code change, which you can push it to the source repository. Then the possible next use case is going to be creating a cloud build. Once the cloud build is created, right, so your image, container image is going to be constructed, and then from there onwards it is going to be deployed onto the cloud run. So that is what we got: continuous integration, continuous deployment. So let's try to see what we need to do now. In my restaurants application, let's add one more menu. So in this menu part here, let's say the menu 4, we got here maybe a pizza, let's say garlic breads. So I'm gonna quickly say 300 and maybe 200, right? So this is a new menu, menu 4, and maybe we can just say it's Domino's with the menu 4. So we got our restaurants application.java, which is now modified, right? So we did a modification. If you come back here, you can check for the status. So there is status that one file has been modified. So we are going to come back and say git add dot, and you recheck the status, you got a file added. So let's say a git of commit. In the commit, I'm just gonna add a new message, new restaurant added, right? So we have committed it, and finally we got git push hyphen u origin as master. Now the moment you did any change, so in the cloud source repository, if you'll come here in the cloud source repository, right? So let me come back here in the repository, restaurants. So we see a new restaurant added, right? And let's come to the trigger and see the history here. And boom, you go. You got one trigger fired, which is exactly trying to do the build configuration for you, right? So there is a build which includes now multiple steps here for us, right? So this is in the execution phase. So everything is being taken care the way it was working previously. But the only thing which we can see now is that in this build which is running, we got 3 steps. So when your image is going to be created, thereafter it is going to be pushed, and finally it is going to be deployed into the cloud run, right? So this is our cloud run. I'm just gonna refresh. So our build is successfully done. So step 0 is done, and the next step is where on the cloud run we're gonna just see if it's gonna come up as a new revision or not, right? So we'll just wait for this build process to get finished, and you can see guys here, right? So build is successfully done, right? So the next part was to come up and create the container image and do the registration. So let this build get finished and we'll see what exactly is going to be the result. So all in all, what we got a few of these steps to understand, right? For CI/CD pipelines on the Google Cloud, you need to have a project, but you need to configure the cloud source repositories to take advantage for CI/CD implementation. Now, containerizing the app is one way around, right? So that you can have a container image, you can automate the container image with the help of cloud build triggers, and with the same cloud build triggers we can have a YAML configuration with the help of which once you got a container image build pushed, you can directly deploy it onto the cloud run. So no manual thing, you just modified the code and you pushed it and you are done with it, right? So let's try to review. So it's still in action, right? And of course you can see now we got a deployment of the container to the cloud run service. So that is in action, and this is our service, if you can see guys, right? So this is, so finally it says done. So you see the cloud build is exactly neat and clean. Let's refresh here the cloud run service. And you see in the cloud run service last deployed just now, right? So if you open this restaurants and you come back with something known as revisions, right? So this is your latest revision just now, and the same URL is going to work for you once again. So we got the URL for the service. So let's try to hit the URL and see if we have the changes coming up here or not, right? So this is welcome all, and when you come up with the slash restaurants, so now you can see the dominoes coming up for us. So this is an entire flow of continuous integration and continuous deployment when you work on the Google Cloud platform. I hope you enjoyed this part. Thank you so very much. Bye-bye.